You see a line across the field over on the other side. It's not on the skyline, it's this side of those trees. From there to the corner of the wood here is our 1600 yards. That's our attack. 12 battalions over 1600 yards. We'd round about 8,500 men attacking, not as many as you think. What a lot of historians seem to forget is that these trenches were manned by our men the 4 days before the attack, and those men didn't take part in the attack. So you can take those hundreds and hundreds of men who are actually manning the trenches right up to about 3 o'clock in the morning of the attack, when they were relieved by the men who were coming up to make the attack. So I work it out that around about 8,500, if it was that, were actually making the attack. Not as many as you might think. On the other side of the hill, 2 battalions. We have the 9th Royal Irish Fusiliers and the 12th Rifles. Now if you have a look into the field on the right of the little track, right now you'll see the 3 German trenches that they were attacking. You see the white line running up through the field? You see the zigzag first line on the right of the little track? That is the German main front line trench. The next one is the second line, and the third line is showing between us and the quarry. Germans have 5 lines of defensive trenches. The British have 2 lines of attacking trenches. We do not need defensive trenches in Thiepval Wood. We didn't need defensive trenches during the Battle of the Somme, for the simple reason that the enemy had no intentions of attacking us. They were quite content to sit behind 5 lines of trenches and wait on us doing the daft thing, you might say, of coming out, forming up in a line and walking up towards machine guns. Where are the other 2 lines? Half a mile past that village. The village of Beaucourt. If you go half a mile past the village of Beaucourt, you'll come to one of the main German headquarters for the attack, for the Battle of the Somme, for the attack here on the 1st of July. It's a massive big farm. It's been rebuilt, it's absolutely beautiful, and before you reach the farm, you drive over the German 4th line, and as you leave the farm, you drive over the German 5th line. So you have 5 lines of defensive trenches back around about a mile. You have the same thing on this side, but we'll start with the attack over here. The double hedge that you see running up towards the back of the farm hides a gully, and that's where the 2 battalions attacked out of. The gully's not as long as it was in 1916. The gully stretched right round to the little track that I was showing you, that line that's running across there just before you get to the skyline. They came out of there at 7:30. They came down a communication trench over here that will show as soon as that field there by that clump of trees is ploughed. It's called Jacob's Ladder, and it runs from Menel village over on the hill where our men were billeted, down along that hedge over there, and it came out by the little church. They came across into the 2 frontline trenches that are in that field there, just to the right of the farm, and then the attack was made from the gully. The men formed up in the gully, and they couldn't see their objective. They couldn't see their targets. They had to climb up out of the gully, and when they climbed up out of the gully onto that bit of the field there, they were mown down by machine gun fire. But machine gun fire from this side, not forward firing machine guns, enfilading fire machine guns. So the Germans have machine guns mainly on their 3rd line, firing over the tops of the 1st and 2nd line, their own lines, and targeting us on the other side of the valley. That is an ideal situation for a machine gun. It's not far, it's not very far. The machine guns had a range of 2,500 to 3,000 yards. That's nowhere near 2,500 to 3,000 yards. The German position here on the 3rd line had rows of captured Belgian machine guns that the German army had captured on the way down through Belgium. They're firing across at our men over there, and they're creating what a machine gun man would call a beaten zone. They're not moving the machine guns about the way you see it in the movies. The machine guns are fixed, but at that range, you didn't need to move them about. Ammunition, very inconsistent. Barrel wear, very inconsistent. And also the range and the wind and everything else. So you've got a big oval created by the beaten zone, the machine guns, the beaten zone. Those were the machine guns that done the damage here on the 1st of July. Enfilading fire was the big problem. That attack failed very, very quickly. The men were driven back, some got as far as the wire, some were trying to capture two tunnels that are in the bank over there, and that was the Royal Irish Fusiliers. They also tried to capture the little railway station that's down here, and the Germans were using the railway station down here. It's still there, and some of the old buildings are still there. One party of 9th Fusiliers, around about 30 men, got into a trench down there called Railway Trench, and they never came back. No one came back from that. They were seen, observed from over here, going up that trench, and there's no record of any of them coming back. We don't know, even from the German records, what happened to them. Two VCs are one over there, and Robert Quigg won his VC, crawling out of the gully, across that little piece of ground, over the track's 1916, and up to the German wire. He's looking for his commanding officer, a guy called McNaughton Barton. Now, if you're ever in Bushmills and you head up the hill towards the Giant's Causeway, the McNaughton estate is on your right. And Robert worked there as a labourer in there, and then during the summer he was a guide at the Giant's Causeway. He brought back 7 men, and the last man he brought back, his grandson, was standing here about a month ago, and he said he wouldn't be here if Robert hadn't brought back the 7th man. The other man, the other VC one over there, was Shillington Keller, a lieutenant in the Royal Irish Fusiliers, and his grandson is coming next week. So his grandson is coming here to see us next week and do a tour. That attack finished very, very quickly over there and allowed all the firepower from over there to turn on the men here. Now, one of the only things that has changed here since the 1st of July is the road that we're going to walk up. Try and imagine, as you're walking up the road, the sunken road. You'll always read about it in anything to do with the Ulster Division, the sunken road. It's still the original depth down here, or more or less the original depth down here, and the same up on this side up here. But in 1921, when the tower was built, and this is the first memorial on the whole of the Western Front, the road was filled in at the bottom of our drive. It's a chalk road. It's the same width and the same structure as this little track running down through here. So it's hard to imagine it now when you see it's nearly getting like a motorway status now. So that was a sunken road. But in 1919, the road was filled in at the Connaught Cemetery. The Connaught Cemetery, when the soldiers were buried with the wooden crosses, the road was round about 2 metres lower than the level, and the level was brought up. I've got photographs of horses and carts coming up a little road that used to run up the side of the wood with chalk from a quarry down in the village of O'Tweel, and they were just putting it on the road. And in the other photograph, there's a horse pulling a big steel roller, and they're just rolling the chalk down. So try and imagine the sunken road running up here. The attack starts down here with the 8th Rifles, East Belfast, right down at the bottom of the hill here. The German front line trench here is in the field here. You see a line running along there, and you see where the weed is here. That weed, the reason the weed does better there than the barley is there's an awful lot of chalk in the ground running along here. That's the German front line, just there at that line. It stops there and turns and goes down the hill. That, for some strange reason, is called the Pope's Nose. I don't know why. The Ulster Division called it the Pope's Nose. It's that shape. It's the shape of anybody's nose, but the Ulster Division christened that the Pope's Nose. Captured by the 11th Rifles at 7:30, well, just before 7:30 on the 1st of July. All the way up here inside the wood are the rest of the Rifles battalions. Behind the Connaught Cemetery, no, over here you have the 13th, you have the 11th, you have the 8th and the 10th. The 9th are behind the Connaught Cemetery, and 109 Brigade, the 8th, 9th and 10th Enniskillens are where we're going into in the wood. And also the 14th Rifles are in the wood. Running out from the wood, from the trench along the front of the wood, there are 9 saps. A sap is a small trench running out from your front line trench out towards the enemy. It's wide enough for a man to pass along and deep enough to give him protection. There's 9 altogether. They've all got Scottish names except number 2, and number 2 is called Finner in Donegal. The number 2 sap is Finner. The 2 at the bottom of the hill, Barhead and Peterhead, Scottish names, were not used on the morning of the attack. There's no attack up that valley on the 1st of July. So the guys on the other side don't really have anybody on their immediate right flank. And the same with the guys here. That's a marsh, bog, still all the way up to Mermont, and it was decided not to attack that on the 1st of July. That was attacked later on in the Battle of the Somme, which became known as the Battle of the Yonk. The valley was captured by sailors, and if you go into the Yonk Cemetery that's down there, it's full of sailors. That's the 63rd Royal Naval Division, who were formed under the instructions of Churchill, who was First Lord of the Admiralty, and they were sitting doing nothing. They were sitting on coastal defences and shore bases, and they weren't needed, but they were needed here, and they were formed into the 63rd Royal Naval Division. They came here as infantrymen, and lots of them are in the Yonk Cemetery down there. The saps were used on the morning of the attack to get our men out into the road here, but we didn't stay there. Now, we're talking before the barrage finished, and this is the old story about the Ulster Division. We had an advantage because we attacked early. We didn't have an advantage attacking early. We didn't attack any earlier than anyone else. But what we did do was we left our front line trenches. We came out of our front line trenches while this was still being bombarded by our artillery. Now, the artillery, there was very little communication between the artillery and the men on the ground. So we lost an awful lot of men to our own artillery. Friendly fire is not an American invention. There was lots of friendly fire here. 6 days and 6 nights of bombardment, and only 6 hours in the 6 days and 6 nights were suitable for artillery. Just 6 hours. But we blasted away and we destroyed the German trench system. I'll tell you more about that when we're in the wood. We weren't killing anybody. For the last 4 days of the bombardment, we killed 3 Germans here. I have their names. I don't have their addresses. I have their names. And that's from C1 at the bottom of the hill to C3 at the Connaught Cemetery. Sorry, Mill Road Cemetery. We killed 3 men. A lieutenant and 2 privates in the German army were killed in the last 4 days of the bombardment here. What advantage did we have? French. The French had a shell that could cut wire. We didn't. We had the use of 4 French guns over on the hill over there, firing 75mm high explosive shells. We did not have a shell that could cut wire. But for round about 400 to 500 yards here, the wire was cut. That is the 400 to 500 yards that the Ulster Division managed to hold on to on the night of the 1st of July, simply because of the help from the French artillery. And the French artillery had their guns over on the hill over there, and they shelled the wire here successfully. The attack here went well because the men had crept out towards the German trenches while the bombardment was still going on. That's how we lost so many men to our own artillery. Another problem with the artillery was no artillery piece is designed to fire that number of shells. They're not designed to fire 6 days and 6 nights. Just like the piston in your car engine, it wears. We weren't reaching our targets. Why do you find British shells in Thiepval Wood? Sure, we're in Thiepval Wood, simply because we weren't reaching the enemy by the end of the bombardment. So we're losing a lot of men to our own artillery. We're going to walk up the road, and I'm going to stop you at sap number... I'll tell you the saps. I'm going to show you number 1. Number 2 runs through the Connaught Cemetery, that's Finner. Number 3 comes out at a transformer there, and number 4 is running underneath the back of your coach. Well, comes out to there. I'll look at where the coach is, and look at where the Pope's nose is, and I'll tell you a wee bit more about that when we're in the wood, because it's better doing it in there when you're actually standing looking at a sap. Right, let's head off. What was being done that you're standing on? 2 bodies were found, one of them directly behind you. Just to the right of the little wall, we found the body of a soldier, Royal Irish Rifles, probably 13. I think he's 13, because the 11th were over there and the 13th were just about there. Number 3 sap breaks into the road just here. The road wasn't this width, the road was more up this way here, and it would probably only have been about that width there. It's only a single track country road in 1916. This guy has come out of the wood there, across the sap, into the sunken road. As soon as he climbed the bank, extended it enough to bury 5 soldiers. We'll just come across while we're over now. So they're going to bury them here, and people wonder how they get the headstones so straight. What you don't see, and you only see it when they're actually putting a new grave in, is there's a concrete flint buried in the ground there, and it has a slot in it that the headstones drop into. So what they've actually done here is they've extended that flint there, and there's enough in there for probably 5. But there's 2 going in there on the 8th of October. And I'll tell you about the other ones when we're up beside where we The newspaper sent it to me. Would you please go to number 24 Grey Street, Newcastle upon Tyne, and that's the recruiting office for the Enniskillen in 1914. So ask yourself, why are we recruiting Englishmen in 1914? We couldn't get enough men from home. We recruited hundreds of men from the Channel Islands. We recruited men from the Isle of Man and all over Scotland and all over England as well for our division. They lived in the cemetery group there. You'll be surprised at the number of Englishmen who died here on the 1st of July serving with us division. It's a wee bit of a surprise when you see it for the first time. David had his ID discs, his rifle, his bayonet and all his kit when he was found just lying here. The road's further out here, and then this is the high bank here that he would have had to climb. And the sunken road is more over that way there. He's not buried in the road. He's on the road now, but he wasn't buried on the road. 28-year-old, he has a wife, a son of about 10-year-old Henry, and 2 lovely daughters, photograph that I have found of him. He's a sergeant and he's the holder of the military medal. He won the military medal in January 1916 on the other side of the hill, leading a company of men in a successful raid on the German trenches. He was awarded the military medal and he was gazetted after he died, actually. He was gazetted in November 1916. David will be buried there on the 8th of October, and his name will be taken off the Bigfoot Memorial at the top of the hill. The men in here were not buried here originally. They weren't buried here originally. They're from 10 burial grounds in the area. Up towards the village is the Chateau Garden. The Ulster Division didn't attack the village. You draw a line, an imaginary line from the corner of the wood, and strike that line between that clump of trees and that clump of trees. Everything on this side is attacked by the Ulster Division, and everything on the other side of the line is attacked by the 32nd Division. We didn't attack Peaceful Village. The 32nd Division attacked up the Chateau Gardens, and they didn't get through the German line. The Germans, same as all the way along here, the Germans were waiting for us. We had the advantage of saps, and the saps took us underneath our own wire. The 32nd Division had to go out on the 29th of June and cut them. I think the Germans didn't have binoculars or couldn't see what they were doing. And at 7:30, when the files through, we're told to file through the gaps in the wire, line up, and we'll all walk up the road. We'll all walk up to the Chateau Garden. Machine guns slowed them down as they came through the gaps in the line. 2 battalions of Sulphur and Hal, and very, very few left alive by the evening of the 1st of July. They attacked the village. They attacked the village unsuccessfully, but their commanding officer, sent a message back, 10 Corps artillery, the artillery that was bombarding here, would the artillery please stop? I have the message, would it please stop? My men have captured the village. That is the disaster for one of them. The artillery stopped on the village and we pleaded and pleaded and pleaded right up until about 12:15 for artillery to silence the machine gun, and no one could countermand the order. We had it on record, the village was captured, artillery stopped. By the time that happened, the 9th and the 10th Enniskillen were over the top of that hill, to the right of the Swabin Redoubt. You can't see the Swabin Redoubt, you can't see the German trenches over the back of the hill, and that was our disadvantage here. The only place anyone could see the enemy here was halfway up that field, crosses the road at that bend, comes into this field for about 20 yards, turns left, goes towards the farm where it is today, and then turns right and goes along the chapel. So that is the chapel garden, belongs to the wood. The wood belonged to the chapel, and Count Rita was actually in charge here. Anyone like to ask anything before we play? Section of the British front line for the attack here on the 1st of July. Now, I'm not really contradicting myself by saying there's no fire steps on the British trenches. This really isn't a fire step. This is an observation step. There isn't another one between here and Finner Sap away at the back of the cemetery. If we'd been defending these trenches, we would have had a fire step running the whole way along these trenches. The trenches would then be protected by a big barricade, a parapet along the front. Try and imagine as you're going round, the parapet is what's missing. All this material here should be here, and the trench would be much up here, much deeper. The same with sap number 1, and this is number 1 sap here. This would have had a high bank of chalk, the wood's all chalk, and would have had a high bank of chalk on both sides. So as you're digging down, you're also constructing something that's going up as well. The trenches were dug by the 51st Highland Division. The Ulster Division didn't come into Thiepval Wood until March 1916. We were here, but we were on the other side of the hill. We were over on Red Ann Ridge, and we were manning trenches over there. If you go over there and you look at the names of the trenches over there, they're mostly from home. But if you come into Thiepval Wood, the trenches are all named Scottish, except for, there's 2 exceptions, and I'll tell you them when we're around a wee bit further. On the 31st of July 1915, at 3 o'clock in the morning, the 5th and 8th Battalion of the Seaforth Highlanders marched into the back of the wood. They were taking over this part of the front line trench from the French. The French had been in here since 1914. They didn't dig a trench system, simply because they're not here to stay. Just the same as we didn't dig defensive trenches, because we're not here to stay either. You're here to make an attack. You're not here to stay. And the last thing you want is to start digging trenches and get it into the men's heads that you're here to stay. And that was really the psychology behind it. The saps were dug by the Scottish soldiers, but extended out into the road by the Ulster Division between March and July 1916. They didn't reach the road when the Scottish soldiers were here. The trenches have all got Scottish names. It says in the Seaford's diary for August 1915, that the wood was an open latrine. You can form your own opinion as to what they meant by that. The French had been here. They weren't all that keen on burying their dead. There was dead animals lying all over the place, and the place was described as an open latrine. The first job they had to do was make it habitable, and they seemed to have done that by filling in lots of the French bunkers and any trench system that they had. They buried dead horses, dead mules, and dead men in the wood. The saps, 4 of them, number 1, 2, 3 and 4, were going to have a deadly use before the attack on the 1st of July. The 16th Rifle pioneers. They brought up 16 gas cylinders into Thiepval Wood. Brought them up at the beginning of June, and they installed them in batches of 4 on 4 saps. 1, 2, 3 and 4 are going to become gassing saps. They were strapped to the side of the trench using chicken wire and tent pegs hammered into the job so they couldn't get knocked over. We brought phosgene over in tanks by ship to a chlorine plant in Cali, and we mixed it 50-50 and we put it into big cylinders. They're about that height. They're about 1 foot in diameter. There's a little red painted gate valve on the top, and we were going to gas the Germans up on the top of the hill. A rubber hose, black rubber hose, ran up the sap, out across the road, and as close as we could get it to the German trenches. We're going to gas all in front of us before the 1st of July. The gas was turned on the 29th of June, and we killed our own men. But where's the wind blowing today? On my back. I've never ever stood here with the wind on my face. 99 years later, it's still coming this way. We couldn't gas anyone using phosgene and chlorine. It came back down into the trench again, and the men that were killed on the 29th, between here and sap number 4, are buried in O'Tweel Cemetery, 13 of them. Not content with killing our own men with gas, we turned it on again on the morning of the attack. I have the letter ordering the gas to be turned off, and then the gas cylinders removed from the front line trench and taken down this trench to the marsh at the bottom of the hill. There's 12 cylinders probably in the marsh at the bottom of the hill because we found the other 4 on thinner sap. Still full of phosgene and chlorine, still got a rubber hose connected to one of them, and the only thing we got to keep was a piece of the rubber hose and the spanners for changing the pipe from one to the other when the gas was empty. The 16th Rifles carried them down and dumped them in the marsh at the bottom of the hill. The French bomb disposal spent 8 hours taking the gas out of the back of the Connaught Cemetery at the entrance to thinner sap running through the cemetery. The attack on the right flank by the 32nd Division failed. I told you about that one. The 9th Inniskillens and the 10th Inniskillens had crept forward right up close to the German front line, the same as the Rifles done further down. That was the order to the men, was to creep out, shell hole to shell hole, and lie down and wait for 7:30. A big advantage. We were the only division that had the advantage of surprise. So we crept out, and the first waves were very successful. They took lots of prisoners. Prisoners gave them a big problem, but I'm not going into that part of it. We couldn't get the prisoners down the hill. They were very difficult to get down the hill, and we had a problem getting the prisoners out of the battle area. The next wave, the 11th Rifles and the 11th Inniskillens and the 14th Rifles. They're in the next wave. Everybody's not going at 7:30. This is going on during the morning. They're the next wave. They were being cut to pieces going up the hill to follow the 9th and the 10th. And we couldn't get men up to support the 9th and the 10th. They're already away over the back of the hill and doing really, really well. The next job for the saps and the next job for the 16th Rifle was to dig sap 1, 2, 3 and 4 into the German front line. That's the order to the 16th Rifles after the attack on the right flank failed. We're going to dig from the road to Mill Road Cemetery. Have a look at the distance. We're going to dig that. That's what the men were ordered to do. The 4 saps are going to be dug into the German front line just to get a volume of men across and into the German front line. Sap number 1, in full view of the chateau, was targeted by one single German high explosive shell. Killed the whole crew. I have the letters over in the cafe to the mothers of the men in Belfast, the young lads in Belfast, who were killed on sap number 1, trying to dig a trench from the road into Mill Road Cemetery. They were written by their commanding officer on the 17th of July up in Belgium. One that I have there I'll let you read it if you want. I usually read it here, but I find it very difficult to read. And it's to Mrs. Marshall in Ivy Cottage, Newton Breda. Ivy Cottage is gone now. Almost where the forensic used to be. The forensic laboratory used to be. Nearly where that big shopping centre is. Mrs. Marshall received the letter on the 21st of June. 21st of July, sorry, 21st of July. That's good postage. That's good postage. Better than we have here today. And the letter stated, told Mrs. Marshall her son, 19-year-old, was killed on trying to dig a hole, trying to dig a trench up to the top of the hill. The guy in charge of that team of men was an American serving in the 16th Rifles called Cole. Now the records show that he's Canadian, but he's not. I've traced him to an address in America on the other side of the Canadian border. But he's in the 16th Rifles. Quite a lot of funny people, you know, people from strange places in the Ulster Division. Cole was hit by the shell, same as young Marshall, and Cole died on the 3rd of July. And he's not very, very far away from here. And it's very easy to see why. He's very close to here, where he was wounded. It wasn't worth taking him any further. And that was the sad thing about it, that there was no point. Somebody would look at the casualty and he's not going to make it. You can't waste transport and taking him from here back to Forceville or Pushville to the hospital. He's not going to make it, and he didn't. And he's buried about a mile from here down that side, down in Aveleywood Cemetery, on his own. He's on his own. The abandoned number 1, 2 and 3 and number 4 reached the German front line at 3 o'clock in the afternoon from the road to the Pope's Nose, the shortest distance. Now, we weren't the only ones fighting here on the 1st of July. The Ulster Division also had the 40 units of the 49th Division in the wood all day, standing in the assembly trenches at the back of the wood. We dug them. We dug the assembly trenches. That's the work we were doing in the wood, was assembly trenches. Their commanding officer would not release the men when we needed them. There was a court of inquiry. It all went to a court of inquiry, and he was disciplined after the event. The men were standing down there in marching order all day, and they were taking casualties as well. He eventually decided to send the men in, and when the order was given, it took an hour to change those battalions from marching order to battle order. 2 different lots of kit, and that was the hour that they wasted. They came up SAP 4, up the left-hand side of the tower, up the communication trench system that you can see on the maps, into the German third line, and they reached the Swabin Redoubt at round about 5:30, 6 o'clock. In the West York's diary, the 1st and 5th West York diary, it says the only thing left in the Swabin Redoubt when they got in at 5:30 was dead and wounded Germans and Ulster men. The fighting had finished. Shortly after that, if you look at the time thing on the map I gave you, on that, shortly after that, the German counterattack got together from 3 sides. There are attacks early on in the day. On one side of the Swabin, we drove it back. On another side of the Swabin, we drove it back. And then, after 6 o'clock, it's a 3-prong attack. And by 10 o'clock, there's nobody left in the Swabin Redoubt. The Germans have taken it over again. And they started to reconstruct it again. Anyone like to ask anything? I need a breath. Anyone like to ask anything? Here from 1914, the Germans started digging the trench system, and strangely enough, the French were leaving them alone, not let them get on ahead with it. You know, you spoil my dinner today and I'll spoil your dinner tomorrow. That seemed to be the attitude, and they seemed to leave well alone. So the Germans got on ahead with their defensive system, and the French were quite happy to settle in. This is a French bunker here, one of the few along the front of the wood, and that's the roof of it there. Now if you wanted, you could climb down in there and you can walk about in that today. It's very, very deep, it's in solid chalk, and this is called cut and cover. So what the French have done here is they've dug a big hole. It looks like a swimming pool when it was cleared out, and put in vertical posts, put a roof across, and then buried it. That should be buried with all this stuff here. Our lads have put a new roof on it and reconstructed it as near as it would have been in 1914. But we haven't buried it because, to be honest, the roof wouldn't hold it. And that's what happened with lots of these. Try and imagine that up to about that height there, with what you dug out of it, put back up on the top again. This is cut and cover. This is a cut and cover bunker. There was nothing British found in there. So the archaeologists give you a story from what's found in the ground. If we'd been finding British stuff in there, then we'd say, right, it was in good condition when we came in 1915 and we used it. But there was nothing British in there. There's another strange thing about, well, there's no fire step there. So that's not defensive. Put a parapet up to there and you'd have to climb up on a ladder to fire your rifle. And anyway, what are you going to fire at? You've got a professional army up on the hill there. They're not walking about in the open. They're not giving you a target. And anyway, that's a long range to hit anybody with a rifle. So back to they're not defensive trenches. This is British. It's a small bunker, and you can walk about in that one. You have to creep down into this one. In this one, we found a soldier's complete pack. It's in the museum. It's a 1914 pack. If you have a look at, where's the boys? If you have a look at that photograph that you brought me of the Enniskillens, they're all wearing 1914 kit. The 1914 kit is made of leather, and the old hands here would have had 1908 kit that was made of webbing. The only thing webbing on the 1914 kit is the big backpack. It was too much leather to make the big back rucksack out of leather. The reason it was leather was because we couldn't produce the webbing kit quickly enough for the army expanding to over a million, well over a million men by 1916. But we made all our own shoes and boots, all our own harness and saddles, and we had no shortage of shoemakers and cobblers, and they got the job of making the 1914 kit. It was very, very unpopular with the men. Now, in that photograph the boys presented yesterday, the kit is absolutely shining. I think that photograph was taken before anyone got anywhere near a trench, and the kit is in lovely condition. It wouldn't stay in good condition here, and after your 4 days in here you only got 1 day to clean your kit, and that's what made the leather kit very, very unpopular. When it got wet and soggy, you couldn't get a shine back onto it again, and the men didn't like it at all. Now, leather doesn't last very long in the ground, but if you have leather and brass and copper close together, the leather is going to last a long time. I'm talking about 99, 100 years, maybe 120, 150 years. The corrosion from the brass and the copper seeps into the leather and protects the leather. So you'll only find an ammunition pouch if there's leather in it, if it's buried in the ground. If there's bullets in it, if it's buried in the ground. This man would have had two 50-round pouches on each side of a lovely big brass belt buckle. Have a look in the cabinet. You'll see his centre belt. The centre belt has a brass buckle and two big adjusters on it. And the belt has survived round to here, simply because of this mass of brass here. His right-hand ammunition pouch survived because there was 42 rounds of .303 ammunition in it. The left-hand pouch didn't survive because this man's breaking the rules. In the army, you have ammunition in an ammunition pouch. You don't put your shaving kit in it, and that's what this man had in his ammunition pouch. We didn't find the pouch, but we found everything that the man had in the pouch. And believe it or not, it was in the shape of the pouch when the archaeologists worked on it here. We found two combs. One, it says on it, British Unbreakable Bakelite. It's a big white comb, and this boy must have had a great head of hair. The other little comb is for your moustache. It's a little short comb for combing your moustache. So we've got somebody with a good head of hair and a moustache. We're starting to identify somebody. He's got a good set of teeth because we found his toothbrush and his toothpaste, so he's looking after himself. We found his razor, cutthroat razor, unfortunately no number on it, and we found his shaving brush. Have a look at his shaving soap in the cabinet. It says on it, Finlay's of Belfast, Ireland, shaving soap. Little shamrock motif in the centre, EST, established 1798. Finlay's had a 5-storey factory in Victoria Street in Belfast up to the late 50s, early 60s, when men stopped using shaving soap and we stopped lighting our houses with candles. So Finlay's shop, the men marched past it in October 1915, down past the City Hall, down to Chester Street, turned left up Victoria Street, and Donegal Quay, where the boats were standing waiting for them, was only a couple of hundred yards away. There was men outside the factory, either officially or unofficially, handing out little brown cardboard boxes with a shaving kit in them. And this man was lucky enough to be one of the men to get a shaving kit. A little ampule of iodine, tiny little bulb, looks like a torch bulb. It's got pure iodine in it. That's all you have against infection from a wound. You snap the glass off and you poured the iodine on your wound, if you could reach it. You had 2 wound dressings inside your tunic, and that was all you had to look after yourself. We found 2 tins of corned beef made in Argentina. The meat was still in the tins. They were badly rusted, but an archaeologist unfortunately put a trowel through one of the tins and the wood was evacuated. The wood was evacuated because a few weeks earlier, the gas was found behind those chops there. That's where the gas was found, directly behind you there, and that's where thinner sap runs from there out through the entrance, the first entrance you come to in the Connaught Cemetery. We found a packet of Huntley and Palmer biscuits and a little book. The book turned out to be The Mysteries of Dr. Fu Manchu. So somebody's got a copy of Dr. Fu Manchu here. He's obviously from the province. He's an Ulster. He's a soldier in the Ulster Division, but we don't know who he is. We didn't find him, and somebody's been wounded. Maybe they've crawled in here. Maybe they've been brought in here. You're big enough, awkward enough, and heavy enough to get down Inverness Avenue over here without your kit, and that's the first thing that you would lose. Anyone like to ask anything? Anybody like to ask anything? Another French bunker here. This is entirely different to the first one I showed you. This is mined out. This isn't cut and cover. This is mined out of solid chalk. It's still supported by the original roof, and it's still supporting a lot of what was dug out of it. So the same as with the trenches, you build a parapet. With the bunkers, you put it up on the top, and that gives you a lot more protection as well. Again, back to Brass Hat and No Man's Land. We're into the area of the 9th Rifles, raised by Crozier, Colonel Crozier, in 1914. Crozier was a professional soldier. He fought in the South African War, and as a young captain in 1909, he made a bit of a mistake. He signed a cheque for his mess bill and his laundry bill. When the cheque went to the bank, there wasn't enough money to cover it. He was cashiered out of the army, but he was needed in 1914. He was given the task of raising a battalion in West Belfast, 40% of them Catholics in West Belfast, in 1914. Crozier raised a brilliant battalion, absolutely brilliant. He was a disciplinarian, he was very, very strict on discipline, and it was one of the best battalions in the Ulster Division, was the 9th. Crozier talks in Brass Hat and No Man's Land of coming up Elgin Avenue. The next one to Inverness is Elgin. We come up here at round about 3 o'clock in the morning, dodging shells from bunker to bunker, all the way up Elgin Avenue. Our shells, lots of them are shells, landing in the wood because they were landing short. He says, I reach a deep bunker, allocated to me for my use. It needs to be deep to keep out heavy stuff. I find the wrong thing has been done. I find the place full of dead and wounded men. It has been used as a refuge. None of the wounded can walk. They've simply been put down the 40-foot deep staircase out of harm's way and left forgotten. He ordered them all out. He wasn't going to command his men in a bunker full of dead and wounded men. Now this isn't 45 foot deep, but the one underneath it is more than 45 foot deep. go down into the back of that, the back right hand corner, there's a shaft running down round about 40 to 50 feet, running down into another bunker. So that's the one Crozier's talking about. You have two entrances into it. You can go in here, into there, you can go in there, that's a flight of steps there, and that'll take you into this one. But over there, if the archaeologists had gone a little bit further, they'd find there's a trench running in there and then down a flight of steps. We haven't investigated it fully, but it's there, the steps are there, and we put a big cover over it to protect it really, and to protect people from going down it as well. The Crozier came up, arrived here, and this is where he commanded the battalion. The next sentence that he says was, "I mount the parapet to observe. The attack on the right has come to a standstill. The last detailed man has sacrificed his life to the god of war on the German wire. Fateful village is masked with a wall of corpses." He's talking about the 32nd Division's attack on the village. We don't find very much in the trenches, and sometimes we find something very interesting. The trenches were not being filled in with good stuff. Fortunes were being made here after the war with what was left behind by the army. They weren't going into the trenches. What we did find in this, I brought along, we found this. The old soldiers among you will recognise this. It's a button stick. You have brass buttons on your uniform, you have a brass badge here, you have a brass badge in your cap, and you have brass buckles here, and you don't want brass on your uniform. So you slide down underneath your button and you can polish away merrily. This would have been shining, and you can polish away at your button. It's a button stick. Stamped on this is 9th RIR 3789. Sergeant Sam Scott from the Falls Road in Belfast. That's Sam's button stick. Sam Scott was one of Crozier's sergeants, and we found it here in Inverness Avenue. We're not the only ones serving in the wood. We handed over the wood on the 2nd of July to the 49th Division, the West Yorks, the Duke of Wellington. They come in and they manned the trenches after we left. We didn't have enough men left standing to be of any use after the 1st of July. And anyway, any men that were still unwounded had been through such an experience, there was no point in keeping them here. We were taken to Belgium, resupplied, refitted, and get ready for the next battle. 49th Division, in the 49th Division with the Duke of Wellington, brought this along, found in this trench here, and it's a spoon. Very significant. It's got a bullet hole right through the spoon. It was found in Inverness Avenue, almost beside where we found the button stick. Stamped on the spoon, WRR, West Riding Regiment, 19982, 19-year-old John William Hatfield. He lived in Glossop. He signed on in 1914 in the town hall in Glossop, and he ended up in the Duke of Wellington Regiment, part of the West Riding. The right-hand row of headstones in the Comet Cemetery are Duke of Wellington's dying between the 3rd of July and the 23rd of July. He was sent out from Richmond with a group of 50 men as battle casualty replacements. He arrived in the wood on the 14th of July. You want to send me a card? It's my birthday. It's also Bastille Day here. 14th of July, and on the 16th of July, as medical record shows, while serving in the trenches in Thickwell Wood, John Hatfield was shot in the right leg, 3 inches below his right knee. That was down his putties. That was there, down his putties. John was taken from here to a military hospital in Oxford. Came back in 1917. He's only 20 years of age, but he's no longer a combat soldier. Because of his leg wound, we put him in the British Army Labour Corps, 376180. He served in the Labour Corps until November 1919. He left the army and he went back to live in Glossop. The story used to finish there, but we had a tour here the other day, about a week or so ago, and one man in the back, he said, "My grandfather served his time in Hatfield's hardware shop in the main street in Glossop." We had a young girl here a couple of years ago, and she had the courage to put her hand up and she says, "My name is Hatfield and I come from Glossop." And I said, "Have you any idea?" The school were to do a bit of research on it, but I never got anything back on it. Anyone like to ask anything? Medium French mortar. The mortar that's in the museum, this is where it came from. This is where we found it. It was underneath here. There's a bit of the original roof here, and it was underneath here. This is the toffee apple. Big steel ball with a long tail on it. I suppose it does look like a toffee apple. It's a plum pudding before the tail's fitted onto it. The soldiers were able to carry them up two at a time on little wooden little cradle things and ropes on them. It's full of an explosive called ammonal, and it has a range of about 500 yards. The range is determined by the number of little canvas bags of cordite you drop down the barrel. And each bag of cordite seems to be round about the equivalent to about 100 yards. So 5 bags down the barrel, after you mop it out to make sure there's none from the previous shot, and you slide this big steel tube with the ball on the end of it into the mortar itself. It's a fixed mortar, it can't be carried forward, and it's fixed to the ground with those 4 big spikes you see with it. We found almost everything here when this was excavated here. It's fired out through the open mouth here, out over here, and over the heads of the soldiers, our own soldiers in the front line. They asked their officers, "How far do these things go, sir?" And the officer asked why, and he says, "Well, we count them going over our heads, but we never hear any explosion. Where are they going?" They weren't exploding. They weren't exploding for a couple of reasons. Pushed into the top of the mortar is a blank round for a 303 rifle. A little cap snapped on the top, and under the cap is a spike. That's got to hit something straight on and hit something hard to explode the bullet. The bullet fires a charge into a secondary charge in a brass tube inside, which actually then explodes the main charge. There was nothing up there hard enough to hit. The soldiers also said as soon as it left the barrel, the tail wagged the dog. So as soon as it comes out, this big long tail takes over and tumbled it in the air. It tumbled over. There's very little chance of it hitting the ground. It's fired using a modified 303 rifle. So you take a 303 rifle, the early ones were Lee Metford, the later ones were Lee Enfield, and you saw it off that length. Threads were cut in the parallel part of the barrel in front of a flap that's on every Lee Enfield, the armourer's flap, where the armourer stamped all the little details of the rifle on it. The stock was sawn off just short of the big bolt that holds the stock into the receiver. That wood wasn't even taken off. That's screwed into the bottom of the mortar and tightened up with a special spanner that fits the flap. You'll see the spanner in the cabinet. We haven't got the firing mechanism because the firing mechanism and the barrel were never left with the mortar. The mortar crew had 1 barrel and 1 firing mechanism and maybe 10 pits because it was a policy of shoot and scoot. You come in here and you fire 4 rounds and you get out of here as quick as you can because the enemy, as soon as you fire, are going to target here and you don't want to be here. But our men are still in the first and second line. We're almost halfway between the 2 lines. Whitchurch Street's behind the blue cover, running along there. So that's our front line and our support line are there. And the mortar pits are in between. There's 12 of them all together from Cromarty Avenue to Union Street over on this side. All connected to the trenches, to the trench system with the trench. The Lee Enfield rifle is fired using a piece of string tied to the trigger of the rifle. So the piece of string runs from there, round there, and in there. When we excavated this, the lanyard was still here, and the little clip on the end of the lanyard, something that you used to hang your keys on, was still on the end of the lanyard. Unfortunately, when it dried, it went into powder, but it was running along here. And everybody, when it's set, everybody is supposed to be in here. 1, 2, 3, pull a piece of string, massive explosion here, and with a bit of luck, off it goes towards the German trenches. Lots of them exploded in the trenches, and that's why you've got this amount of protection. They were useless, absolutely useless. I remember reading a letter, I think it's the Somme Association has it, or maybe it was in a book, where our soldiers were charging up the hill and tripping over these tubes sticking out of the ground, and the comment was, the mortars didn't do us any good. They were a total waste of time. We stopped using them, and either this was wrecked by a shell or a mortar, and the mortar was left, or we're maybe going to find one in all the pits along the front of here, because they weren't worth taking out, and they weren't worth taking up to the Hindenburg line. By the time we moved to the Hindenburg line, we had a Newton mortar, which had a shell detonator on the top, and was much, much, much better. Anyone like to ask anything? Because I'm finished.
Oh, to the left, right, march!